All right, gentlemen, thank you for agreeing to be interviewed as a part of the Culturally Responsive School Leadership Institute. Can you briefly tell me your names, your roles in the district, and how long you've been here and prior things that you've done in the district?
You want to go first? All right. Michael Walker, Director for the Office of Black Male Student Achievement, currently been in this role starting in the 5th year. Prior to that, I was a assistant principal at Roosevelt High School in Minneapolis, and I think I was in that role for 3 years. I'm also have been a dean of students in Minneapolis Public Schools, as well as a counselor in the district, all kind of within 3-4 years of each other. Prior to coming in education, I worked in nonprofits. So I worked at the YMCA for 10 years doing youth development work. And really my work has been centered around supporting Black youth to set and attain high academic and career goals. So kind of brief.
Thank you.
So I'm Corey Yeager, Minneapolis Public Schools, working with the Office of Black Male Student Achievement as the Educational Equity Coordinator. Been in that role for, I think this is my 3rd year. So kind of the last 4 years in doing that work within the Minneapolis Public Schools. By craft, by trade, I am a licensed psychotherapist. So previous to this role, I've done quite a bit of work in the Minneapolis Public Schools and the St. Paul Public Schools around engaging and supporting therapeutically with students, predominantly African-American male students. If I had to pick the segment of or population that I do the most work with, around supporting them in the hopes that they can academically find their way. So that's to some degree the work that I've been up to over the last number of years.
Absolutely, thank you. Gentlemen, can you explain to me why there was a need for an Office of Black Male Student Achievement? What was going on in the district that required such an office to be established?
Oh, so what was going on in the district or what was going on across the country? I think it's a little bit of both. So what they found in the district is what they found in most educational settings, is that our Black males, well, let me say not what they found, what they decided to look at and actually start to figure out what they're going to do. They looked at the data and saw that we had students that were not achieving around graduation, test scores, being in school, attendance. And so they saw that those numbers were low. And then when you look around and look at behavior, you saw out of class referrals, out of school suspensions. We saw that those numbers were high for Black males. And the community, and at the time the superintendent, Bernadette Johnson, decided they wanted to do something. And so they created the Office of Black Male Student Achievement. And then they came and asked me if I would be interested in taking it on. But that's the reason why they needed that office. But I'm sure you'll ask me some other questions where I can get to some other details later. I'll wait.
Okay.
That's the reason why.
So to add on to that reason why, I would say, in part, that the reason why it may be to soothe the pain of white fragility and frailty, that sometimes what is needed is, hey, we don't know what to do with these kids, so maybe y'all can figure out what to do so we don't, right? So there may be pieces of soothing that fragility in the creation of the Office of Black Male Student Achievement. I don't think that would be anything that would be discussed out loud. But we know that the struggles with Black males has been deep and profound, not just in Minneapolis, but across the country. You figure out that you can't or don't know or maybe don't want to work with that segment of population, creating an office to do that work may soothe that itchy surface.
You all work closely with with Black males across the district. What has been their experience, in their words, that they've told you that they have been experiencing in this district? What are some trends that have emerged that have guided your work?
And I know Mike did a lot of work on the front end when the office was created. And some of the things that he found, and I'll let him speak more deeply to that 100 days of listening and what came out of that. But one of the things that we found is that not just the Black males that were students, but the Black males that were teachers and support staff had the same issues that the students were having, not having voice. When they show up and attempt to have voice, it is squelched, not being seen as not capable. It is the thing that you will hear us talk about, I'm sure, in this conversation often, that we don't believe that there is such thing as an achievement gap. If there's an achievement gap, teachers will quit tomorrow because those kids just can't achieve. So what we submit is that there is a relationship gap and an opportunity gap. That if we start to close those gaps, if we build relationships, if opportunities are offered, those gaps closing would close the perceived achievement gap. So that the trend that young black and brown males were having is that the lack of support. They didn't have people in the building that looked like them in perceived positions of authority. So where could they turn? Every day I go to school and there ain't nobody that looks like me in a position of authority that may be able to help me maneuver through this process. So if you don't have anybody that looks like that, yeah, the tendency that my social studies grade is a D or an F is high. The tendency that I don't do well in biology is high. But once we do find that level of support, the trend began to change. I'm sure we'll talk about it as we go. But when they found the relationships and the opportunities were given in an equitable way, those gaps all of a sudden began to close. So I think those are part of the trends that we saw from the beginning, but Mike has many more details on that.
For sure. So Dr. Yeager talked about the 100 days of listening that I went out on. So I outlined and listened to 4 different stakeholders. So parents and families, community members, educators, and then the young black men themselves. That was really key for me because sometimes, all too often, we want to start and create programs without having the voice of the people that we're supposed to support at the table. So I want to make sure that we didn't start off in this work by not having their voices at the table. So I want to go out and hear what their experience was going through our school system. So as you asked about what were some of the specific things that they shared with me, one story was given to me at one of our high schools. The young man said, no matter where we go, we're always viewed as monsters. And me being a counselor, I'm like, tell me more about that, right? I want to learn more about where it's coming from. So he starts to tell me a story, and the story goes like this. He says, so me and my friends were leaving school one day, and so in Minneapolis we have these go-to cars where all the students get to use public transportation. So everybody has that bus card. So he said, me and my friends were going to the bus stop outside of our school, walking up to the bus stop, and it's Minnesota, so it can be cold some of these times, even when it's in the fall. So it's kind of early fall, probably like October, probably around this time. And he said it was a little chilly outside, and so the wind was blowing, and he was walking up to, we had those bus shelters. And he said, so they were getting ready to walk to the bus shelter, him and 3 of his other friends, and there was a lady sitting in the bus shelter, a white lady sitting inside the bus shelter, where it's warm, they got little heaters in there and whatnot. And so he said, as we walked into the bus shelter, she got up and walked out. Wasn't a bus coming, wasn't anything coming. And he said, that make us feel like monsters. And obviously, some of the students start to yell, hey, I would have did this to her, I would have did that to her. And I'm like, no, we're not here for that. But I want to know how did that make you feel like that? And he just went on to say is that if she would have just said, hey, how you doing? We would have spoken to her. She would have got to know who I was and know that I wasn't there to do any harm to her. But just like her, I was cold trying to get into the shelter to get away from the cold wind. So that's one example that they shared. Again, another story they talked about is about mentors. So in schools, we love to bring in volunteers and mentors for our students. And they said it, no hesitation. I'm tired of white women coming in here supporting me and wanting to be my mentor. I said, tell me more about that. They said, well, first, they're only coming for 1 hour a day, maybe once every other week. And so it's like a small time frame. Well, I don't need that shit. I need somebody who's going to be there for me when stuff really get hard. I need somebody I can call at 9 o'clock at night when I'm in a situation. So you sending somebody who I got to keep telling my story over and over again to these new people that are coming to my spaces, and none of them look like me. Yeah, I don't want that. That ain't what I want. We already got enough of this in our building where no one looks like us. So you keep bringing in more volunteers to mentor me. Yeah, I'm not going to tell my story over and over again because I got to keep reliving that story. And now you're going to walk away in 9 weeks or 16 weeks, whenever your program is over and done with. The other piece, I got tons of these stories. Other piece they shared was about the curriculum, right? They said, I don't ever get to hear nothing about myself in a positive light. When we started in schools, they talk to us about slavery. And that's where they start us. And so what's the real foundation? Is that the foundation they want us to go through our education with, go through our lives with? Why aren't they telling us a different foundation? So frustration on that. So those are just a couple of stories. I mean, I got, like I said, tons and tons of them.
Did you get a sense that they felt like they had been listened to before you came through with the 100 days of listening?
No, not at all. So obviously I'm going into now you got me telling stories. So obviously I'm going into this space, and I don't know a lot of these students, right? Because I'm going across the district. So I was the assistant principal at Roselle, so I had a good relationship with those students. But at the other high schools, Edison, Southwest, Washburn, North, I don't know a whole lot of these students. So I'm in a space where I don't know, and they have to trust me that I'm really going to listen to them. So I, being a person from North Minneapolis and understanding how you have to build trust really quick with black males, I found a quick way to build trust. And that way I built trust was I brought them all in the space. Well, first I emailed the principals and the people saying, hey, can you get me 20 to 25 black males that I can listen to get some information from as I start this office? So obviously, everybody wants to hear what the hell is going on and what you're about to do with these young black men. So you got all the building principals, counselors, social workers, and all that in this space. And in my mind, like, well, I'm not really going to hear the truth in this space. So I start out the conversation with the first question I asked the young men. I said, can you be truthful and honest with all these people in this space? And if you can't, then we need to tell me if you want me to kick them out or let them stay. They said they want them kicked out. So I said, oh, y'all got to pack them and get the hell up out of here because I need to listen to these young men. I need to hear the uncut, raw truth of their experience. And they said they can't say that with you guys in this space. So that's the way how I was able to build real truth and trust right there in the moment, because no one had ever stood in a gap for them to kick adults out of a space to hear their voices. So with that being said, I think I got to the real nitty gritty. I let them speak in the language that they needed to speak in. So I didn't shush them. I didn't tell them they couldn't use profanity. I want to hear your truth right now. We can figure out the vocabulary later, but I need to hear what you're talking about, what your experiences are, so that we can really change what we are doing within this school system to benefit you. And so that's kind of how I went and designed that space. So I did that little trick in every one of the spaces, and it brought out real truth and honesty. Some of it was tough to hear, right? Some of it was tough to hear, but it was what we needed to hear in order for us to try to create an office that would be really support of them and not supporting the institution that I represented.
Yeah. You guys are both educational leaders, and my questions are going to gravitate towards systems and leadership a little bit today.
Okay.
And as you bring these experiences with these black men that you had in 100 Days of Listening and the ongoing experiences in the states, of these black students, I want you to use that and think about it interpersonally for sure, but also the implications for systemic change in leadership. Let me start with that. What has been some of your biggest frustrations around conversations that deal with equity, race, social justice, cultural responsiveness? Some of your biggest frustrations.
You want to go ahead?
Well, I would just say that anytime that we begin to use those terms, what we oftentimes are doing is talking around race. We don't want to talk specifically about race, so we'll talk.
Give me an example.
So if we say, hey, so when Mike and I have conversations with schools, admin, teachers, we say specifically in our conversation, we're going to isolate race. Today we're talking about race. That doesn't diminish, specifically black males, doesn't diminish any of those other categories, but for today we're going to isolate race. And when you do that, a level of uncomfort comes to be. We don't talk about race. Minnesota doesn't talk about race. It's a passive, aggressive space. So when we begin to go down the road of race, what people tend to do is shift into different spaces. I hear you, that's good, but I think class has got a whole lot to do with what you're saying. See, so now what I've done is shift away from the uncomfort of holding the conversation of race. I want to talk about diversity. I want to talk about culturally responsive teaching, right? All of those things are quite important, but they get away from the core root causal issue of racial difference and indifference. So to me, once we start to play in some of these other arenas, I think that we lose the element, the pureness in conversation of race, which is something that we're taught at an early age, many of us, black or white, that we're taught in our homes, usually implicitly, Don't be out there telling what mom and dad make as wages. Don't talk about who we voted for. Nobody need to know that. And we don't be out there talking about race. So those are the things that we're taught implicitly in our homes. We carry that into our personal lives. So when it is time to say, hey, but unless we talk about race, we cannot address the issue of these gaps and these disproportionality issues that we face, people are uncomfortable. They don't know how to do that. Never been able to hold that conversation because we've never had practice in that space. So when we start to get into this offices and issues of diversity and inclusion, all of them are quite important, but the shift away from race is disheartening. Now, one of the things that we are clear on, as a black and brown man, I don't get the opportunity to shift away from race. I walk into this room, I walk down these hallways as a black man. Ain't no shifting. This is what I carry. Our students carry that with them every single space they move into. So what we are very clear on as well is that any time you can shift away from or avoid conflict avoidance means privilege, right? So if I could talk about diversity, when you say we're going to isolate race, I'm in a space of privilege. I don't need to talk about race. I want to talk about gender. I want to talk about socioeconomic status, because you've hit a nerve. Sitting in the dentist chair, they hit a nerve, you start to move around when they hit a nerve. Race is the nerve in the dentist chair that people don't want. I don't want you drilling down into that space. And not only are white folks uncomfortable, but we have ingested racism. We've eaten it, and it is deeply in our system where we become uncomfortable with the conversation of race, even though we move every day with it. Yeah. So we say, they done told us they don't want to talk about it, so let's not talk about it. We want to make sure that whiteness is safe and is not being pushed against, because I need to go to them for things, and I need to get a raise, and I don't. So we're going to leave that alone. One of the things that Mike and I have done in our role, we ain't nervous about that. Yeah, we're not going to be nervous about that. And we're going to let our babies know, you don't have to be nervous about that. We can move through this world without being nervous.
And Dr. Yeager, how do you respond in the office, as an office, to pushback or shifting conversations or the tendency to make this about guilt or anger or denial? How do you all deal with the pushback?
So I would tell you specifically, in a professional development that we had some of that pushback. And one of the things that I said, which is to some degree unorthodox, I began to hear this fragility and this pushback, and I said, so let me be clear. We told you we're isolating race. So if you are fragile, if you hold white guilt, we can open another room next door for you to go in and take anyone else that wants to wallow in the white guilt. Y'all go over there and wallow. For here, we're going to address the issue of race. We're not going to be nervous about it. We're not going to back away from it. So we're going to stand in this gap unapologetically. So people they don't know what to do with that. That's a new territory. So our office has had pushback from the inception. And I think that Mike and I have found comfort in that uncomfortable space. We have learned to find comfort in that. We have learned to anticipate the pushback. It's coming. Actually, that's a signal that we're doing things right. Yeah. The pushback there, Mike, there it is. Oh, here we go. Now, and usually when we get that pushback, doctor, what we can say is, yeah, now the true conversation can begin. Yep. Now we can start the conversation in earnest, because the pushback, they've now gotten uncomfortable. We've hit the nerve. They're wanting to come up out of the dentist chair, but we're going to lock the door and say, have a seat. Everybody sit back down. This is part of the process. We'll all be uncomfortable together.
What are some of your biggest frustrations around equity reform and equity work in terms like social justice and the pushback around? What are some of your biggest frustrations?
So I'll just say one, because Doc hit on a whole lot of them, Yeager. But one is the ability to have liberal lyrics. And so what I mean by liberal lyrics is that we have people in our spaces who know the right things to say at the right time. So they know how to be out front speaking the words equity, speaking about diversity, speaking about supporting black males, and all those fine terms in meetings where they get to just share information. What I'm frustrated about is those lyrics do not turn into action. So now when it's time to show up and vote, or when it's time to show up and push back, when it's time to show up and be an unapologetic advocate for black males, I'm nowhere to be found. I am always leaning back on the structures of white supremacy and really just saying, yeah, I know what to say, but I don't do it in my actions. That's the biggest frustration. So we have people who know what to say at the right times, but when there's nobody watching, when they have a young black man in their classroom and something goes awry, they just fall back on their traditional thought processes. They're not thinking about how does this impact equity, how does this impact this young man's educational experiences, what can I do as a teacher to have made sure this was a better situation than what it was. That's not happening in most cases, and that's what's really frustrating for me.
We gotta do this shit our way. Hey, so Mike, it reminds me of the conversation that we have of windows versus mirrors.
For sure.
Yeah. So these conversations that we're talking about here are moral issues. Teachers are used to ethical dilemmas. Okay, what do we have to do to stay out of trouble? Yeah. This is what we need to do. You got to get that paper in. Very good at that. But when we discuss issues of race, that is an issue of morality. Yeah, so what we found is that many of the folks that we work with fall into two different realms of discussing and engaging race. Window watchers and mirror lookers. So window watchers on race do this. Oh, honey, look at those black folks out there. This is so horrible. Let's send some money to their cause. And honey, when you send the money, can you put a Facebook post up so everyone knows that? That's the window watcher. We ask the moral issue to be a mirror looker. Look in the mirror on race. Who are you in the context of racial engagement? Who are you to black and brown students every single day? What are you doing specifically as they sit in front of you and the moral issues explode? How do you respond morally? Is your moral compass broken? If it is, let us work to fix the moral compass. Because that window watching, beautiful as it is, we need it. We need that. But as a teacher, as an admin, if we talk about the change in climate and culture in a building, it must be done in the mirror. That's the only space that we can change it. And you will not get a raise for looking in the mirror. You don't make more money for looking in the mirror. Right? So that is a moral issue that each individual must face, especially in the context of race. So it is that issue. So we do a professional development, a PD, around windows and mirrors. Right? Who are you? Most often folks are mirror, they're windows. We want to move people from the window to the mirror, especially around the context of race.
Okay. Other frustrations that you all have. Let me ask a question like this. Once you get people to recognize that they need to look in the mirror, right? And you see them squirming in their seats, they're experiencing some discomfort. What next? What do you all then do? How do you continue to have the conversation, or once they're being self-reflective, how do you get them to shift from that space into practice, make that link to what they'll do? Because part of it is morality, but part of it is skill.
Well, it is. Some of it is about letting them know that you have to practice. Right. A lot of our folks are scared to jump in because as educators, we have been told that we have to always be right and we also have to figure it out. And what we talk about in our workshop is about Well, we ask our students to be uncomfortable. We ask our students to be risk takers because we know that when you make mistakes, when you're uncomfortable, that's when the learning really is happening. So you are definitely on the journey when you start to feel discomfort in your space. But now, as you start to feel that discomfort, what actions are you doing that's different than what you've done in the past? And if you want to become better at this, then you have to step out and you have to make some statements to people. You got to try some new things, and they may not work the first couple times. But that's part of growing, that's part of learning. So as you do it more and more, you get better and better at it. It's hard to get people to go to that space, but as we start to do our work, we start to talk about having accountability partners, so that you have someone in your space that you can have check-ins with about maybe what you're thinking, what decisions you have made, and they can give you some honest feedback. That's kind of one of our steps that we do. And I know Doc going to talk about cognitive dissonance. I'm assuming that's where you're about to hit, so I won't hit on that. But it's really about getting our people in a space where they're willing to take risks, willing to step outside of what they have traditionally done, in the process of knowing that they will get better after they take more practice and more time. Now, what kind of hold people back with this is that, we have HR and human resources and unions and that sort of stuff, which I am saying is that we need to have a position of restorative practices for our adults. Because as we're talking about race, people are going to make mistakes. I don't have it all figured out every single time that I'm sharing and talking. That's why I have Dr. Yeager here that can help me and check me when I'm like out of bounds, or I said something inappropriate or whatever. But we have that grace with each other, that he has the ability to share with me, saying, hey, Walker, you kind of messed up here and you should think like this. And I can do the same thing with him. How are we doing that in our school sites, and how are we including and providing that grace with our students, with our families? And I think we do a disservice by not communicating with them on the front end, or consistently, or all the time, to let them know I'm human, I'm going to make some mistakes. Right? That's the process of education. It's about learning, it's about making mistakes, and it's about growing from those mistakes. But I think we have eliminated that in our school system of saying, as educators, I got to know everything, I can't make any mistakes, and if I do, I'm done. Well,
can you give me an example of what that accountability partners, like how that would play out in a scenario or a school? Like, how does that look, for example?
So how does that look? So it's hopefully an accountability partner, you can reflect on something that you did in your practice, where you go to that person and you ask a question saying, hey, so this happened in my classroom. Little Johnny was standing up walking around, and little Chase was standing up walking around. Johnny's black, Chase is white, right? I sent Johnny out, but I didn't send Chase out. Can you help me figure out why you think I might have did that? That's one, so they have dialogue about that. The other way an accountability partner works is, I'm in your classroom and I'm seeing some things, and now at the end we do a debrief and I ask you questions. So I saw this take place, and you got upset when Johnny asked for the pencil, but when Chase asked for the pencil, you just gave it directly to him. Right? So how is somebody coming to...
Who's the watcher in that scenario?
Whichever teacher. I'm just saying, it can be teacher to teacher, for sure, it can be teacher. So that's how our workshops work, is that we have, it's really with the teaching staff in that space. Obviously, admin are in those spaces, and some support staff are in there as well. But we are trying to make the playing field level so that anybody can have these conversations with anybody, and it's not in a space where it's punitive. It's more in a space where it's growing and growth, so that we can learn from it. And so then we have check-ins within our professional development opportunities. When we come together, we have a check-in at the beginning. So connect with your accountability partner and have some dialogue about what you guys experienced from the last time that we was here, that you guys want to share and get some feedback on. And then we have some of them share out on occasion. So that's kind of a quick little way that it could be visible. I mean, there's other ways that you can do it, but yes.
So in terms of visibility, so one of the things that teachers want, they want the science. Well, tell me what the science is. So we bring tons of research to our conversations with teachers. So one of the things that we talk about a lot is unconscious bias. Right? The brain is doing something. What the research tells us is that oftentimes, if you're multitasking, which teachers are doing a lot of, then that means that's a space that bias can find a home. So if we can move teachers from unconscious bias to your point of awareness, so now they're aware. That's the beginning. Now I'm no longer unconscious of these things. I've had some conversations. Now I'm starting to recognize there are some things that I may be doing. So then what that allows us to do is move into a space, and Mike spoke about it, of cognitive dissonance. At least now I can have a battle in my head. Why'd I do that to Johnny and not Chase? Now, before I just did it. It was unconscious, I just did it. So now if we can begin to have this dissonance and this battle ensue in our heads, we can begin to make some different choices. And if I have built-in things, built-in options in my building that say, okay, now I am aware, I wasn't aware about this. Now I can engage with Dr. Khalifa and say, hey, I got to talk to you about something, man. I ain't noticed that I did this before. Johnny and Chase, and here's the scenario. Now you can give me some feedback. I've got enough trust because we're colleagues and I liked you, we were friends before. Now we can begin to have a dialogue about that process. But you can see where that microcosm engagement between the two of us, that's happening in pockets across the school. All of a sudden the climate and culture in our school may begin to shift. Right? So we attained some level of awareness about self. It is Fanon's piece of decolonization. He talks about decolonization. One of the pieces that I think is important in Fanon's work that we don't talk about, and Fanon didn't really write about it, but that for us to have decolonization, we must first have introspective decolonization. I will not join your broader movement unless I've done introspective work. Who am I? Have I decolonized my own mind and thinking before I can join your movement? So we say that the engagement around equity work, you must first do introspective equity. Who in the hell am I in the context of this equity? What does this really mean? Do I believe in this stuff? If I can affirm that, yeah, I think that there is some stuff here. Now I can say, all right, now maybe I can join a broader movement within my classroom, department, school that is talking about the changing climate and culture around equitable movement. So I think that there's an iterative process, Doctor, that it has to have some individualized introspection. If I can move, and there will be folks that do the introspection and say, but I ain't finna do that. Yeah, I'm not doing that.
Let me ask you something. I'm glad that I can push you brothers a little bit deeper because you are citing people like Frantz Fanon. So how do you deal with people who can't recognize that they're being biased and they don't have the sort of epistemological framing or awakening to look deeper, to see their patterns of behavior that they may be doing?
Yeah.
Do you all work with principles or data or other, like teacher level data or something like that will allow them to say, because it seems as though what you're helping them do now, which is great, is hold themselves accountable or having hold each other accountable, but many teachers may not be aware because it's invisible to them now that there are biased approaches to pedagogy or instruction or
So yes, that's a huge question, right?
Yeah,
I mean, so first and foremost, we are a very small office with a huge district. So I just want you to understand, because the question you asked is a real deep.
But I want to ask you because both of you are school leaders, right? So that's why.
I appreciate the question. So what we do use data, right? So because we can't get it down to the teacher, we just don't have the ability and the time to be in each person's classroom. We do it school-wide, so we get the school-wide data. And so we start to dissect that data to say, so what do we see? What are some factual things in data? What can we start to infer? How does that look? And our goal is, let me not say that. Typically what I've seen is that people come in for one-shot PD. And so now what you're saying is, well, they only heard it one time, so I'm not going to be able to see my biases. I'm not going to see what I don't see. When we come into a school site, we are there over the school year and multiple school years because we want this to stay on the forefront of people's brains and the forefront of their minds so that they will have no choice but to think differently. So that's our work of saying we're going to always be there. So you're going to see us. We're going to show up. We send emails out to our staff, schools that we partner with links about different articles that they can read, right? We're bringing that stuff forward into our PD workshops, videos, articles, deep dialogue discussions about certain topics and situations. One thing, I always say one thing, but it's probably like a million things, but one of the things that we do is we don't just flick through our damn presentations to get through it. We stop and we have discussions and we'll dissect and deconstruct whatever situation is going on so folks can see the thought process that maybe their colleagues are going through, maybe that myself and Doc are going through, so then they can get a better understanding of how this process works. Also, being a counselor and whatnot, sometimes we self-disclose and show them where my shortcomings were before I got into a space where I am today. You know, really what we try to let people know is that it's a continuum. And everybody is at certain stages in this continuum, right? It's not that everybody's at the end and I'm over here. I had to come through this process, so I can't be frustrated with you because you're not where I am on the continuum. My job is to be a teacher. What I expect from them with the students, I expect from myself with them as the adults, right? So how am I scaffolding the learning for them and giving them what they exactly need? Sometimes we get so caught up in these learning targets and objectives that we forget about the human side of this work. And so we try to be very much in the moment and try to take care of the human side of this work, knowing that people are scared, nervous, right, unsure. So how do we address all those things? We take our time.
The human side.
Yeah.
The human side also says some folks ain't with this.
For sure.
The human side says there will be folks that say, I'm not finna do that. I'm not with that. I ain't finna do that deep dive. I'm not with that. So we have to go into the process, understand, hey, everybody's not going to be down with this conversation and move. So the reality is there will always be a segment of the population, districts, schools that are not engaging in this, don't want to move in that way. The question that would be more broadly engaged for a school or a district is, does the climate and culture in your school or district say, yeah, you are an outlier now. You don't fit anymore. So we are moving in a direction that says we're going to address this, and you're now an outlier. It used to be the flip. The folks that wanted to talk about equity and engage in that conversation were outliers. But now the climate and culture over time has now grown in our school and our district that says that person that doesn't want to do this work is uncomfortable.
Dr. Yeager, I want to ask you about that. That actually is my next question. And I guess it speaks to how the humanization of black male students specifically, but even more generally, equity is promoted in this district and what you see district-wide in buildings. Can you speak to how that climate is changing and what is it? Is it something? How the district promotes it or supports it?
Yes.
That process
So
is.
I don't know that any district is truly promoting the humanization of blackness. I don't think that. I think that a district and a school level is a microcosm of broader society. Now, if we look at that, if we believe that any system is a microcosm of a broader system, the districts are subsystems of a broader national system, there is not a move towards humanization of black and brown in the broader society. So what I think that has occurred is that we've gotten, the districts and schools and sites have gotten better at disguising some of this work. But at an unconscious level, what we've had for many, many years, Doctor, is the dehumanization of black and brown in the education
What would a
system.
humanization of black and brown students look like according to the Office of Black Male School?
So the humanization of black and brown would look like a white teacher that is with all white students. How that sounds and looks, it would be similar for all students. Do we think we're going to move in that direction and get there? No, let's just be realistic about it. It has been a tough conversation that we began to have over the last few years so we've had segregation before 1954, and then we had integration. After 1954 and Brown v. Board, we integrated. We didn't integrate black and brown teachers, we integrated students. And it has been a horrible experience for many black and brown students. But if we go back into the annals of history and look pre-1954, we were educating black and brown students at a pretty damn good rate. We had PhDs that were running schools and engaging students and part of the community, and mom and daddy knew them, and right, boy, you're not finna do that. We had aunts and uncles leading our school systems for black and brown. The issue was that it was inequity in financial resource. So it wasn't about the inability for black and brown teachers and admins to educate our students. That was not the issue. It was a financial inequity. So then the question that really may be out there is, what we found is when you give us our babies back, when you let us get our hands on our babies, we will become uncles and aunts in the classroom, in the teaching setting, and the findings are that we will be successful. So then we have to have a broader, deeper conversation about, so what does that really mean? No one wants to have the conversation about segregation and integration. They think that was for 1954. But I think it may be present now. Is it the reality that we're going to move towards segregation ever again? No. And I don't know if that's the case. I don't know if that's what we need. But for us to engage our students in a way that is humanizing, it may take folks that look like them to spark that conversation. And we hope that our white allies will begin to understand the humanization of our students in a newfound way. But if we look at broader society, microcosm says, yeah, we're not moving in that direction. Is our district, well, we have to then look at the data. We have to look at the financial resources. We've had a budget that was around 1.2. Over the last year, it's been cut by 300,000. We've had good data that says we're doing very well with the students that we get the opportunity to engage with. Our families are quite happy with the outcomes of the students that we have the opportunity to engage with. But inequity says, yeah, I know y'all doing that, cut them. I don't care what they're doing. Yeah, good, I'm glad your data was good. I'm glad the students and the family, we still cutting you. So in my mind, I'm not gonna speak for the office, but in my mind, that is the antithesis of equity. Yeah, you're against equity when you make those moves. I can't take your words because your actions speak so loud. I can't even hear you. I can't even hear what you're talking about in terms of equity because your actions speak so loud. In terms of this, looking at dehumanization or the humanization of black and brown, there hasn't been a move that I could put my finger on that says it's been humanizing.
Can I ask deeper about that? And so I want to make sure I understand you when it comes to the conversations about this. You mentioned equity, and you mentioned that that when the way that white students are formed, I'm paraphrasing, but if I misquote you, let me know. The way that white students experience classrooms with a white teacher, when black students can experience that same kind of thing, then they will be humanized. And I'm just to be clear, you're not only talking about equity, you're also talking about, for example, the positive epistemologies, the ancestral knowledge, and all of the assets that black males bring
I think
as
that's
well.
part of the humanization.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, all right.
I think that's part of the humanization. That now all of a sudden in the curriculum I find myself. I have not previously found myself. So I'm not saying that we keep the same curriculum and now we got a white European curriculum with black and brown students, but I'm trying to, you can't humanize if that's the case, because that's a portion of the dehumanization that I have yet to find myself in the curriculums that have been presented to me.
I find myself just a negative parts of myself.
Yep, and then
that's what they show.
The negative parts and then the absence thereof.
Yeah.
So I get negative, and if I don't get negative, I get absence.
I get nothing.
Right?
Right. That's what it.
So I think to your point that it has to be. I think it's a both and, that we have to have an approach that's humanizing socially and emotionally, but I think we've got to have a revamping. The critical race theory in education says, what is the authentic voice of black and brown folks showing up? Have the curriculum? Do we have do we have a critical lens on education? And it's tough sometimes, Doc, to have a critical lens on the system that you're a part of. Right? And I think that's what Mike and I have done. That we're part of a system, Minneapolis Public Schools, but we're critical of that system. James Baldwin said, the deeper you get into a system of education, the more critical of that very system you must be. And that's the work that we're doing, as we more deeply engage in the system and better understand the system, the level of critique we have increases. I think it's a natural response. I think it's the way it should be. So we're becoming more and more critical as we go. So then there comes a point that they say, we ain't with you too critical now. You didn't reach the tipping point. That's too critical. Let's squeeze at it. We got to squeeze them. It's time now. They're being too critical.
Black teachers, talk to me about how you, because I think earlier it was stated that sometimes black people have sort of, some of the black teachers have, or staff. And I think I've written about this topic, and many people have written about how they begin to kind of take in some of the white supremacist tendencies regarding black male students. Can you speak to your experiences with dealing with black educators, both in a positive light as well as in a light that you kind of have helping them become awakened about some of the issues that you do?
Yeah, I mean that's the work, right? That's how you know the system is working. If you got the brown folks also doing the same thing that the white system is doing, so the system is working. So really it starts off by saying, so what do we want as educators? Who do we want? How do we want them to be? So my belief and philosophy is that we have sent teachers to college and they have become content experts in math, science, English, whatever subject they're teaching. What we haven't taught them at the university level is to be experts in relationship building. And really what the key for our work is that I believe that we are missing that component, that we have focused so much on content in our other spaces that we have forgot again about the students that are sitting in front of us, the humanization of the students that are sitting in front of us. We're not even humanizing them because we're just going through what we have decided is what the curriculum should be. This is what I got to do, and you just better catch it where I'm going, right? No. Let's find out who our people are. So I coach basketball, right? Let's just say that I am a coach who loves to press. I love to press, full court press, hard-nosed defense, everybody up there, right? When you have a team that is fast and can move their feet, that defense works. But if you have a team that not as fast, can't move their feet as much, you might not be able to press full court, right? So as the coach, I have to be responsive to what my team attributes and skill sets are so that we can still be successful in winning games. But that means I got to get to know who my players are. And I think we have missed that opportunity in our classrooms to get to know who our players are, because all we're saying is, I just got to get through this lesson, this curriculum. I'm not trying to understand who you are. So going back to your question about teachers that we want to bring into, the work that we do in Office of Black Male Student Achievement is I went out and recruited teachers who were strong at building relationships. Very strong at building relationships and understood the importance and value of building those relationships and how you can leverage those relationships to teach. That is a hard sell in an institution that wants traditionally trained educators. But my pushback, my critique of the system is, if all we need was traditionally trained educators, we wouldn't be in the situation that we're in. So don't tell me that's all we need, because that has not worked, right? So how do we go outside of that realm to find folks who we can teach the technical components to? I tell folks all the time, I wasn't a math teacher, I wasn't a science teacher, but if you give me the lesson, the learning target, and let me mess with it for a little bit, I can go into that classroom and my students are going to learn that information, because I'm going to get to know them. We're going to make that activity fun. We're going to do it together. We're going to all walk out with that information, because I'm going to take the time to build it. I think sometimes we may be moving so fast through our curriculum that we are creating the gaps in the students' learning. We're also moving so fast in our curriculum because guess what? That's exactly what it is. It is a script. So the universities have taught the teachers to be a script giver, right? And our students, our young men, they want to ask questions. They want to push back. And when that happens, guess what we do? Hey, we can't do that. Hey, can you come get him up out of here? Because you done took me off my script because I don't know anything past the script. But what we have to just show the students is that we are all lifelong learners. We're all lifelong learners. So we promote a lot in our spaces that we may not even have all the information that we're sharing with you. We're going to learn this with you. Because again, we went through a system of education that didn't teach us about ourselves. So at that same point, we are learning still about who we are, the positive images of our work, right? And the foundation. So that is really important, where our traditionally trained teachers feel like they have all the knowledge. And so I'm putting knowledge into these babies and not even valuing what the babies already bringing to the table. Where we look at that as a flip. We value what they bring to the table first and saying, what can I help? Well, how can I assist you in learning a little bit more than what you already have? So we don't see them as empty. We see them as already having greatness in them. And our job is to help fill it up even more.
So to that point, so a traditionally trained teacher, especially, specifically you ask about black or brown teachers, if they're traditionally trained, they have been steeped in white supremacy.
Sure.
That's just the obvious answer. So I've been steeped in the tea bag of white supremacy. So when I go to move forward to pour into my students, I am pouring white supremacy, right? I am a gate holder for white supremacy. So
what does that look like at the classroom level? Like, for example, how they...
The curriculum. I'm not going to be critical of the curriculum, and
I'm not even stepping outside of the curriculum to go see who my student body is and say, okay, I got some Native American students in my class, I got some black students in my class, I got some Latinos in my class. Let me find some stuff that can still hit those skill sets that we want that will relate to them. I'm sorry.
And to that point. So if it relates to them, so if I'm teaching social studies, it is insufficient to just say I'm going to look for black and brown names to discuss.
Right.
I must also be critical with my class and asking the questions of, so where were your Native American brothers and sisters while we talk about this time period?
Yeah.
Where were your African brothers and sisters as I talk about this time period? Right, so not only bringing a few names and putting some posters on. See, that is the facade of addressing. That's multicultural education. What food do y'all eat? Oh, I didn't know they ate that food. That's so great. We should even bring some of that in. You think your people want to bring in some food in? Right? Oh, I didn't know they wore those hats. Oh my God, it's so cute. Yeah, that's multicultural education. Doesn't have anything to do with equity. Nothing. So I don't say it's a bad thing, but it doesn't do anything to address inequity. It doesn't do anything to address white supremacy. It doesn't do anything there. So if our teachers are steeped in white supremacy in their training programs, they're only going to bring that forward. So if we can find ways to interrupt, once you get them into the schools and they're teaching, you've already missed the opportunity to interrupt white supremacy. White supremacy got to be interrupted in kindergarten. Before that kindergartner ends up being a teacher, we got to start to interrupt white supremacy. And the only way you can interrupt it, you got to recognize it. Right? Once it's hard for the tea to be separated from the water once you've been steeped in it. How you gonna separate it?
Yeah.
It's all one thing now.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question. Do you ever have equity teams in this district?
Some schools have equity teams, not all, but I know they're moving to a space where schools are supposed to have equity
school
teams.
level?
But we have site-based management, so implementation can be different at different sites. So there may be a team assigned, but we don't know how far they are in their journey and their longevity of being a team.
I want to ask about that because that's one of the administrative structures that schools and or districts use in order to try to promote equity. And I want to ask you, What have black male experiences been like in schools with equity teams? Have those equity teams served black males well or not?
No. Well, I would say no, and then I mean,
Well, let's go to the next question.
I would say no, but I also want to know that sometimes those teams are just designed and people are just placed on there. So I'm not 100% sure. Is it something that the person wants to be on? What is the criteria for them being on that team? Are we looking at their own practices as we're placing them on these teams? What is it? Is it I'm on this team because I'm going to get an additional stipend? Mm-hmm. Is I'm on this team because it looks good on my resume because I want to move to another role later? Right? All those things are at play, and so I don't know what the real reason why people are deciding to be on these teams, which then, if we don't know their real reason, then why do we think there are going to be some different outcomes?
Mm-hmm. So
just to
in terms of those equity teams too, see the term that we always hear people is so we want fidelity.
Yeah, that's a good term.
Okay,
it's a great term.
So is there fidelity and equity? In engaging and discussing equity, you never hear people talk about fidelity ever. They talk about it in the curriculum. They talk about it in different categories. But as soon as the term equity comes forward, the conversation of fidelity really kind of falls off. I wonder why that would be. Because we want to just all to kind of do our own little thing, and we want to be able to say we have an equity team. It doesn't really matter what they're doing. We got in name only is important.
Well, let me distinguish between equity and culturally responsive schooling. There are a number of scholars that have written that some communities that experience equitable results. So equity is claimed for those people, right? Like, for example, West African students, which are happen to comprise the most successful group of learners in the country, statistically speaking, as you all know, can do well in school. They can get good grades, they can score well on standardized tests, and they can get into universities. The question is, what have they given up in order to do that? Well, right? And so they've given up almost all of their indigenous epistemologies, the community experiential knowledge, their comfort in school. They've compromised all of that. So while on paper it seems like they have achieved equity in some schools, they definitely have not achieved cultural responsive education for these students. And so I guess I want to know, as we distinguish between equity and cultural responsiveness, do you get a sense that teachers and or principals and or district leadership know the difference between those two? And if so, how are they promoting cultural responsiveness? Allowing teachers, do teachers know where to go to get indigenous knowledge from the people they serve and incorporate that into the curriculum? And not just talk about it, but even tell stories from the perspectives of those people, the same historical events or mathematics or whatever. So I guess I just want you guys to, from a district perspective, say whether or not you believe, you've spoken a lot about equity, but have you seen spaces in this district that they do have cultural responsive, positive, affirming spaces for black male students? Do they seem?
That's a really hard question to answer. The reason why I say it's hard to answer is, so the sites that we are partnerships with, there's a culture in small pockets in those buildings, right? I can't necessarily even say overall there's a climate and culture that is supportive, because many folks have been conditioned to only see black males as less than, as a deficit. With your question about leaders, right? Well, they didn't necessarily get in those roles because they had racial equity as their front-running idea or philosophy. And again, there's no test, there's no quiz, there's no rubric to go out and see where teachers are on this racial equity that we are using as a district to give them some type of feedback on that system, that either that they're implementing or not implementing. So I mean, that's a difficult question to ask. I think we are trying to move towards that with the work that we're doing in the office by having the building administrators and district level administrators go through some of our PD workshops to try to get them to become more aware. But again, it's about practice. So they may have some thoughts, they may have some suggestions, but are they willingly practicing this work? Are they really opening themselves up to be vulnerable. I mean, that's a really tough thing for adults, the teachers, but then now you're moving it to another level, even a leader to be vulnerable about some of their maybe shortcomings or areas of growth with their team, with their superiors sometimes. That is a difficult space for folks to be in, which is why I keep sharing that we have to have an opportunity for our staff to have this restorative process so that it's not looked at as a weakness, it's looked at as a growth opportunity, and that I'm trying to get better and I'm trying to learn. So I'm going to ask a lot of questions. I may try some things, and I always get frustrated with saying, well, shit, we already know what the results are if we keep doing this. So why wouldn't we jump outside of that and try something different to see if we can get some different results? That's a really, really tough one, because obviously we don't necessarily we don't supervise the principals.
How have principals reached out to? Oh, go ahead. You want to get
so just a bit that contrast between cultural responsiveness and equity, I think is a tough space for a teacher or a admin or a district level person to engage with, because there is a deep-seated belief that assimilation into this educational system means we don't need all that. Yeah, that's why the equity numbers, the equity looks good for that population that you talk about, because it's saying, I don't need to be trying to get this indigenous knowledge in here, because I think I can teach you if you just assimilate. Leave all that. We're just Americans here. Yeah, it's all Americans, and we're all just gonna, this is the educational system we have. We can achieve equity if you leave all that stuff at the table. Now there will be months like February we'll talk about a little bit. We'll do a little stuff for a few people. They're dumping more of those things on us. We'll eat some foods. We'll do some of that. But to bring indigenous knowledge that comes from elsewhere in here, and for me, that means I got to do some learning. I'm not trying to, I'm a content expert, for God's sake. I'm a good math teacher. I'm a good social studies teacher. We don't need all that. Y'all help them when they come in your community. As for this school, yeah, we're not trying to do a lot of that. Now, will you ever hear an admin or a teacher say that? No, you're never going to hear them say that. But the actions that they have will be pretty much in line with that. So I think that contrast, that rub, I haven't seen a ton of spaces. I think, to Mike's point, in some of our buildings, you will see elements of culturally responsive movement, but a space that is really decent, deeply engaging that cultural knowledge base and seeking that cultural knowledge and bringing it in and ingesting it and making it a part of.
How do you respond to leaders who say, look, my teachers are already stretched too thin, they don't have time to do that? What's been your response to that?
So they won't share that though. So no one has really said that their teachers are stretched, at least I haven't heard it directly, that their teachers are stretched too thin, they're not going to respond to that. I think we see it in their actions, right? They just don't do it, or don't change their practice, or don't think differently. So they won't necessarily, because again, they know the right things to say in the spaces, but when it's time to implement it, when no one's watching, are they really truly implementing it? And that's the part where we don't necessarily have a great checks and balances in our system to be able to go in and see how that is working. Because what I've shared with folks is all the time is that, well, ain't nobody losing their job because black males ain't being successful. Actually, I got a job because of it. Right? So even looking at, I look in the mirror and I have to say it to myself, I got a job because of the failure of black males. So what's the, and Doc said it, what's the urgency that people have if it don't impact my pay?
I can still be regarded as a good teacher,
even if they are not being successful.
That's on them.
Not even 3. I can have a whole classroom full. But I still be regarded as a good teacher.
Talk to me about parent voice. What are some of the trends? I asked you about student voice. What have parents of black male students told you about their experiences with the district, the experiences of their children, and what are some of the trends?
So I'm gonna let me just hit it because I know this is your question more than anything. But I would tell you, go ahead.
Might be 2 hours.
One thing that we know, and Mike kind of coined this phrase, educational trauma. So what we've seen is that the intergenerational transmission of trauma rooted in the educational system. That if my granny, who had a 6th grade education, said them white folks don't care nothing about educating y'all, I had to hit the field in 6th grade because it wasn't gonna help us and we needed to get them crops in. So if that's what my granny had, and then she handed off to my mama, you better watch them white folks who are over there. They don't even let you sit at the counter and drink soda with them. You think they're gonna care about you getting educated? Now I gotta send your ass because they said they're gonna send a social worker if we don't. You're going over there and do whatever it is you're supposed to do over there. I don't even really know nothing about that. Don't have them white folks calling me about no school stuff either. Now my mama raises me and tells me, them white folks don't care about you, boy. You better get them that whatever homework and stuff you got to get done, get that shit done. And don't be bugging me about no parent-teacher conferences and stuff. And now I show up and I go through a PhD journey, but I say to my sons, hey boy, you better watch all them white teachers. They're not in the business of being supportive and aunts and uncles to you. They don't care about you in the way that I talk about when I am my work. So you better get your shit. And I expect A's and B's. And now the difference is I will come to that school and raise hell if I hear anything that I don't think is in line. But I'm still giving them the message of they don't care. So I am taking Granny's trauma from 1930 and still handing it to my babies. Generation within generation, and generation after generation. So some of the things that I say to my sons today come from Granny, right? So that trauma has now found a home in the DNA of how I see education. And now you think my sons won't carry that? Yeah. So when it's their turn, they'll transmit. They then are transmitting what Granny gave in 1930. All the way even down. So what we've seen is our families have suffered from this educational trauma.
But not to essentialize black discourse in families. There have been non-trauma related discourses about education in black families as well.
Sure,
probably.
sure.
Okay.
Yeah. But I think the overwhelming discourse, especially in the K-12 engagement, is around you're not going to see people that look like you. You're going to have teachers that don't care about you in a way. Now, I don't mean that there's not some stories and anecdotal aspects of saying that there's some white teachers that will go out of their way for you and may want to be supportive.
I was thinking black teachers, like in Detroit. We have a large number of black teachers that they're not all culturally responsive.
Yeah.
So some of the same discourses I had about black teachers a lot.
Oh, yeah.
True, but yeah.
You got a bunch of blacks saying you got a bunch of black teachers. They ain't gonna be.
Some of them, some of them.
Well, maybe I haven't had the opportunity to see the world in that way because I only had white teachers.
Yeah.
My baby's only experiencing white teachers.
Yeah.
Detroit is an anomaly.
Yeah. When I was in San Antonio, there was a lot of Latino teachers, and if those Latino kids came through with sagging pants, or they were recent immigrants to America, they caught hell from Latino teachers. So
they were upholding white supremacy.
Right.
Yeah. So I know Mike got more.
Yeah. Hey, what are some? I
expect I got the question because y'all went over.
What are some of the parent voices that you hear that burn in your mind that drive this work? Trends that have been heard year after year that parents have said to you about the experiences of their black male students?
Yeah, Doc hit on the educational trauma piece about just really how they had to walk through the school system, and so they don't trust the school system with some good reason. I mean, I really heard that system of broken beliefs. So they don't believe that teachers are fair and equitable when it comes to dealings with their black males. So that's around behavior, that's around academic outcomes, and so, like you didn't say it all. I'm trying to figure out what. So with that being said, so you want to know specific stories?
No. Give me a couple of like quotes if you remember any, like somebody came in and said something.
Oh, there's probably cool.
Yeah.
So let me see. When I was barbershop, so I was doing my barbershop tour. A couple of families really
barbershop tour.
Yeah. So in my 100 days of listening.
You went to barbershop
so,
tour.
So my 100 days of listening, really what I designed was a space where I can hear true, authentic voice, not coming. Typically we always say, hey, we always ask families to come to the schools, come share your perspective, and typically what we get is families who are used to plugging into the system, having their voices heard, and so they share their perspective. Even black and brown families, right? So I want to go into spaces where I would figure out that there would be people who may not be coming up to the school system, who may not be coming there to no town hall meeting to get their voice heard. So I decided to go into barbershops, hair salons, to have these conversations and dialogue with parents and families in the community, in their spaces where they felt valued, where they didn't feel like they were coming in as less than, because that's what sometimes our school system treat our families as less than. So I want to make sure they had the upper hand in that space. So I was coming to be a listener in that space. So in some of the one of the barbershop conversation discussions I said was really about how do teachers perceive my child, right? Are they perceiving them negatively or positively? One thing they shared was that I only have received negative phone calls home from my son over the course that he's been in Minneapolis.
And how do they interpret that?
Well, they interpret it as you don't care about my kid, and is he only bad? Like you never called about any good things? So that's how I was hearing them discuss that conversation. And so one thing is about how do we engage with them in a different way that is not traditional to what the school has done. And the school for them has been around this trauma piece that, well, I don't want to come up to the schools and I don't even want y'all calling my phone. So if you got those two spaces, well, that's going to be an issue. That's going to be a huge issue for us to communicate and connect when we know that the first teachers of our children that we have in those school buildings is their parents. So now if we got to disconnect with that just creates a missing loop that we have to try to recreate. So we have to find a space to create trust. And so we said we're going to be intentional by being outside of our building. So we're going to authentically engage with our families and communities by being outside of our school spaces. So we have made some partners with community-based organizations. So one would be like the YMCA, Oak Park, Park and Rec, where when they have meetings, we go there and be a part of their meeting because they already have the trust of the family. So how can we leverage that trust that they already have? Another piece is I had our teachers in our classroom reach out to our families regularly with positive phone calls, only positive phone calls, no negative phone calls whatsoever, so that we can rebuild that trust. So they see the phone number, they're not hanging up when they see 668, because that's what typically happens. Even I do that, and I work in the district like I see 668, I'm deleting that or canceling it, I'm not answering that. So how do we change that? A lot of it is also face-to-face stuff. So how are our teachers being in spaces that are in the community that students can see them, that families can see them, so that we become back a part of the community? Because that's what schools used to be, right? They used to be community spaces where the parents knew the teachers, the students knew the teachers, the students knew the parents, right? Everybody was together. And we have really come to like, it's almost like a corporation. This is the entity, you go there for this, and then you leave. There's no other real dialogue, no other real interaction, no other engagement, which again goes against our philosophy of building relationships. So if you can build those positive relationships, you can have different outcomes for our babies. So as you asked about the parents and families, what they have experienced it goes back to their experience as a student. So this data that we talk about now is not brand new. So our parents experienced the same graduation rates, same test scores, same discipline issues. And so, yeah, they are going to have a negative perception of that. Now, I heard you say earlier, well, that's not all black families. No, it's not all black families, but it's a high number of black families. It's a high number of black families.
No, when I said that, I was just I wanted you guys to speak to the agency that you witnessed as well.
Yeah.
That's all.
No, I'm understanding. So there's a high number that have experienced that, which is traditionally the population that we have been tasked to support and change, right?
Absolutely.
Some of our black
Absolutely.
families who have had a nice track record, who have been engaged with the system, those students have not necessarily been placed into our classes, right? So when I say placed, so we don't go out and recruit the students to be in our class. The schools kind of select the students at the front, on the front end. Now that we've been around for some years, students now do recruitment of their own. So they say, hey, make sure you get in this black class. So we do get more of the students who may be at a higher level academically or less behavioral incidents.
So I guess I should have asked this from the beginning. So all of the things, like your core functions that you do, you I know you provide PD because you mentioned that, but then there's a class that's for students, and then there's a listening tour. Am I missing something? Is there something else that you regularly do or that you have done?
So yeah, so you talking about the bucket area. So really what I created was, so after doing that listening tour, what I created was a belief framework.
Okay.
I got it right here for you. You find the books, you can look at it.
Okay, good.
So this is in all of our stuff. So this is the belief framework that I came up with after doing my 100 days of listening.
Okay.
And so it really just talks about, and I can send it to you through email so that you can have it if you want to put it up on something. But it really just talks about what was the non-beliefs that these 4 stakeholders did, and then what the beliefs I want to get them to. Right, so we have to change beliefs of people. So as Corey talked about the opportunity gap, I am a proponent that there's a belief gap. What we believe as adults is how we treat our black males. Right. So if I don't believe that you are valuable, if I don't believe that you can be successful, well, when you're in my classroom, I'm going to teach to you like that. So I'm not going to push you academically. I'm not going to ask you questions to challenge you, right? I'm going to leave you alone and let you just sit there and not even mess with you. So we as adults have to change our beliefs on what we believe about our black males. And so that's really what this work is designed around. And so even parents, we got to have parents change their beliefs about their engagement with schools. So yep, that was your experience. How do we change your beliefs so your child don't have to have that same experience? How can we support you in being a stronger voice for your child so that they get the services that they need, so that they get what they deserve as they're going through this educational system?
I'm hearing a tension, and that is that the system is white supremacist. It's not set up to serve black children well. But then I'm hearing that you all are saying that you're trying to get parents to kind of soften toward the district and students to navigate that space. So I'm wondering if you think that this is it your ultimate goal to kind of prepare students and parents to navigate that space, or are you trying to change the space, or do a little bit of both?
So we are doing both. I think it's a both-and approach.
Okay.
So as I shared this before, it's like, so when you work in these big systems and institutions, man, we down there and we are pushing and pulling, and you talking this big old ship that you're trying to turn, and you're doing all this work, and that mug, you don't even see or notice that it's turning because it's so huge and so big, right? So we have to do that work, but then we also have to get support to the front lines, which is what our babies are on the front lines and our parents and families on the front line. So how do we give them the ammunition so that they can navigate, so they can be successful while they're going through the school system at the same time while they're trying to change it, right? So that's the hard work of trying to be in both of these spaces. And what it tends to be is, even looking at me, right? So, folks are saying, well, Walker got the bow tie on, he got the hat on, so he got to navigate. They may say I'm assimilating, but I have to be both. I got to be so black that my students see that you can still be who you are authentically and can make it through this space, but I also got to be dual consciousness, double consciousness, code switching, whatever term you want to use, that we are facing on a daily basis. As we grow, because I'm growing as a person, and in my thought process, I don't want to do that anymore. So I'm going to be authentically Michael, and whatever that means is what that means, right? So I'm going to be here in this space, I'm going to be here in this space, same Michael. And so what we are trying to do, what our attempt is, how do we carve out that space for our kings in our program to be authentically them. And so that's why we're trying to change the system and also give them tools to navigate. Now, obviously there is, supporting numbers. So as we are working in our classrooms with our students, we are giving them a cohort of people to be able to navigate the school space with. So that when I'm in class pushing back and critically questioning the system, right, and critically questioning this teacher, I got somebody in my class that's going to support me in that, right? We didn't have a voice at first, right? And so when you don't have a voice, sometimes it's a little scary to say stuff out loud when you don't know who got your back or not.
Yeah.
It's a little scary to question. So now they have a cohort, a community of young black men who are all working and striving for the same goal to support them. So now they know that they have that. So I mean,
You all spoke of a cultural shift. What are some indications that the culture is indeed shifting in the district?
You saying we spoke of a cultural shift?
So a cultural shift.
Students or adults? That's what I'm wondering what you're talking about.
It seemed that Dr. A was talking more about like the adults in the district. There's a maybe I don't want to misquote you.
I think there's pockets of a shift, but I would say again, I think that overall, if we see it as the microcosm, I think that shift is that's a great metaphor. I haven't heard you describe the turning of a huge ship. I think
like that.
Susie said it. I saw a cruise ship.
Me too.
That is just there, and now individuals are going to have to turn it. So it's facing this way, we need to face that way. And there is no power on the ship. How are we going to move it? Now, if you get in a little boat and you got a rope, you're not going to be able to move it. So we're going to have to get a ton of individuals. At this point, there's about 10 dinghies out there with people on it that are beginning to tie the ropes to the bigger ship. Is it moving yet? I don't think it's moving. But there's individuals in the ship now that are saying, oh, we got to move this. Oh, okay. We have never had to do that before. We got a few people down there. Should we join them down there, or should we try to move from here? So I think now the coordination of moving that ship has begun. And I don't know that Mike and our work can take credit for that move, but we're part of that. So that cultural shift, I think, is just the genesis. If I would say for this district, I think that shift is at the genesis. Will we be here to see the boat change direction?
That's the hard part. I hope so.
Yeah, I hope so.
But that's the
question. If there was a single most important issue that you would love for the educators in the buildings that you all serve, and in the other buildings in the district, what would that message be?
I think it would be, for me, around this concept of humanization. That in conversations usually with staff, we're always saying, hey, remind yourself of the covenant that brought you into the teaching profession. We usually have a covenant. Oh, I want things to be different for the next generation. I mean, there's usually a covenant that's in place. Remind yourself of that covenant, and in that covenant, did you have something around helping humankind? If that is the case, re-engage and re-energize that covenant, and at this point, make sure that you are specific about reminding yourself that blackness and the humanization of blackness must be part of that covenant. That would be my hope, is that that you see the young kids that look like myself as equals in a journey towards education, and that you don't stand as the all-knowing as a teacher. That's not the way we should be. It should not be an all-knowing. And to realize also, another piece is that collaborative and collective learning is just as important as individualistic learning. Especially for Black and Brown, it becomes more important that we can share in the learning, right? That collaborative learning that comes from the continent of Africa, that collectivistic understanding, be seen as part of the process, not outside of the process, and that humanization. Those would be messages that I think would help for all students, but specifically Black and Brown students.
What would be one message you would?
One message that I probably would share is be a critical questioner, right? And what I mean by that is question everything that the system of education is doing or trying to do for specifically black males and students of color, but question the system to see if there's different ways to go about achieving the goals that we want to achieve. Do not just agree and follow along and follow suit, but question them, try to have them think differently. I think that's really what I want folks to do, and that's something that I share with our young men, is to question the system that you are in and challenge, because there's other ways to get those results, and we don't have to just follow the path that has already been set, but there's other paths that we can take. So as educators, I want them to critically question the system, really, and be serious about questioning, not just doing it for, joking around, but be really intimate with it, question it, and then when you question it, thinking differently about what you can do yourself to impact your small little sphere of control in your classroom, in your hallway, and hopefully that can permeate throughout your building and then, to the district.
Thank you. And now that the introduction is finally
That's another question.
I'm scanning. I'm serious too.
Look, he ain't got to the second, third grade.
Let me ask one question. I want to ask about the personal cost of doing this kind of work to you two.
You saw our body. You saw our body. Yes, a personal cost.
Body.
Because you all are at the center point of multiple tensions, administrative tensions, teacher, parent, student. All of these voices come to bear on you two. You guys both are black men doing this kind of work. So what are the personal?
I told my mom was here from out of town the other day. And I said to my mom and my wife, it make me emotional now. I don't know how long I'll be here. Not in this work, but on this earth. Because of this work. Because when you talk about that tension, we're swimming in a sea of toxicity. And this work, we've had to agree to dive into a toxic ass environment. But we're doing it. I think it takes some time off your life to do this work in an authentic way, to stand in the gap, to say, I'm going to lay down and be part of the bridge that allows my people to get over here. Y'all come on. It's going to be back-breaking, life-altering, and I think, to some degree, that means that my and Mike's cortisol levels, I wish we could have done some cortisol level work, do a workup on us before we started this, and do it today. There's no question that our cortisol level, it's continuously releasing. These conversations right here, releasing cortisol into the bloodstream, which means my heart isn't doing as well as it was 5 years ago. And if I do this work, and I think that this is probably the work of my lifetime, that I'll do something similar forever. Forever may be a few years shorter than it used to be.
What's most painful?
I think it's most painful to know that I see those young people that could be my sons and are my sons and my nephews and my nieces be treated as second-class citizens. The W.B. Du Bois talked about in the early 1900s that the color line will be the issue. Well, shit, 2018, it's the issue. That those issues still today we face, and we spoke earlier, Doc, when we were walking down the hallway, that these systems of oppression and race are more efficient today than they've ever been. They look different. It takes even more work to figure them out.
They're also more hidden.
They're hidden, so again, like we said, these systems, postmodern racism is a racism that smiles. Hey, Doc, how are you? Good to meet you. How's your family? Everybody good? Oh, that's great. But when it's not around you, and we look at employment rates for African Americans, we look at disproportionality of suspensions and perceived achievement gaps and housing discrimination. They're as bad now as they've ever been, if not, in some cases, worse. So what it speaks to is a system that has become more efficient in its hideousness. So Mike and I say all the time, I turn to Mike, he says what he says, we talk back and forth, and then we both laugh because it keeps us from crying. We don't have anywhere to turn.
What have been a cost to you?
I don't know if I see it as a cost, because I feel like this is what I'm supposed to be doing. You know, when I took on this role, so I almost said no to the role first of all, and my mom basically outlined my entire life of the work that I did when I was at the YMCA. She talked about, well, you were doing Black Achievers, where you was taking kids on college tours and connecting them with mentors that were Black professionals. When you got into the school system, when you were a counselor, you make sure that you had opportunity to apply for scholarships, specifically Black males. You had colleges come up there and visit them. I mean, you were doing all the work specifically with Black males. You became an admin. You brought in Corey to do a group with your young Black men at the school to support them and work with them so that they had some outlet and whatnot. So you've been doing this work all your life, Michael. Why not just go ahead and take this role and do it on a school system wide? So that made me say yes. But so the cost is, so I'm really not a person that likes to be out front. So the cost for me is being in the public eye, having to be up in front of people sharing this, which is not what I was used to or comfortable with or wanted to even do. So for me, more personal about it, it stretched me to do things that I wasn't interested in doing. But but when you're supporting young Black males and you work for them, you have to go in those spaces and speak. I have to be in front of those spaces. So they have given me the courage to be in these spaces and to share and to bring their voices to the powers that be about what their experiences and what needs to change on their behalf. So I don't know if it's been a cost to me. I think it's actually been helpful for me, because I've always had these thoughts, these ideas inside of me, but I never was pushed to bring it out. Right? I was able to just do it in my small little circle. And that's, I mean, it's something to be said about that as well. You know, sometimes it's good to do it in your small little circle, because that's something that you do have control over. I think as we talk about all this work, a lot of people get frustrated or nervous and saying, well, I can't change the big old system, and I can't. But can you change your classroom? Can you change your hallway? Can you change what you do at home? Right? Can you change where you shop? Right? You can do those small things so that you can be a better version of you. So if we all decide to do that, then it makes this work a little bit easier, because now you got more people following the same footpath. And I think that's what Doc was referring to about our work in the schools, of saying if we can get a few teachers here, a few teachers there, now you start to create a whole different climate and culture in that building that says this other way is not where it's at. You cannot be in our space doing that. And so now people start to retire early, self-select out of that building, right? Because your thought and your philosophy is no longer welcome in this space, because we think this way and this is what we are about. And that takes some time to get to. Definitely takes some time to get through. You know, we talk about all the time about this race conversation, and you know, Doc hit on a few things, but one thing that we really talk about is that our white counterparts, they're probably like first and second graders when we talk about race. But the issue is they're the supervisors, they're the building leaders of Black and brown people who, by the time they are in high school, got a bachelor's degree in race. Right? By the time they are 20, they got a master's degree in race. And by the time you are age, shit, we got PhDs in race alone and how to navigate. So you got white folks who are supervising people who have a much higher knowledge base than them, but the white folks want to tell you what you need to be doing. And you're at first and second grade level. You don't even know that you're at first and second grade level. So when we have conversations, I'm speaking at a doctorate level, and you want me to speak at a first grade level. There's going to be some issues with those types of conversations, because you're not going to understand where I'm coming from. So it does beg the question about us. Are we willing to kind of take our knowledge down to help them grow and develop. And I think that's what our professional development is really about, is saying, how do we break it down so that we can scaffold the learning for them to try to get on this continuum to be better at what they're doing with our black males in the classroom. And again, the work that we do is specifically designed for black males, so that's not, I'm not going to act like that's, we apologize for that. But if you take on some of these skill sets, some of these things that we're sharing, you can help all marginalized groups, right? But our laser focus is on black males because that's the way that we can teach and get people to think differently about other marginalized groups that they are working within our school systems. So, I mean, I kind of that question about what has it done? I mean, so that's one thing, it done that for me. I mean, also, you know, it takes away from time with family, you know. I got 4 kids, and so a lot of the time I'm, you know, trying to balance how they are part of the work that I'm doing. So, you know, I heard someone say there's not really a such thing as a work-life balance. They use a different term, but I'm trying to infuse my worlds together so that there's no way that it's separated, because I do bring my kids to our events. I have my wife come to the events. They support me. This is not turned off at 4 o'clock when the bell rings. This is all day, every day, weekends, on vacation. This is what my life is about. And so, yeah, I can't see it any other way. So I don't know if that's a cost, because I look at it as a benefit. I get to do something that's right for the people that I love and care about.
Absolutely. So,
Thank you, boss.
Thank you, brother. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
No, man, I appreciate y'all.